Hi, I'm Maggie. Welcome to Experiments in Crafting. Tonight I'm going to be talking about some local yarn store brands. So we've talked a lot about indie brands, so indie dyed yarns that are hand dyed, usually by one or maybe two people. Those typically are small brands. They only have a few different yarn bases. Maybe a handful of colorways, and it's usually either one or two, maybe a very small team dyeing up these yarns. You generally can only get them online or at like crafting shows. Then I also talk a lot about big box brands. So those are Bernat, Red Heart, Lion Brand, things like that, where you can go into Joann Fabric, Michaels, Walmart, depending on where you live. There might be some other big box stores. AC Moore comes to mind. I think they're only on the East Coast. Any of these brands where you can walk in and buy yarn at a big store that sells other craft items. And then the thing that we don't talk about very often are the local yarn store brands. So in many areas, there's little yarn shops run by usually like one or two people, and they carry a subset of brands that are only available to local yarn stores. So you'll never see these brands at either a yarn show, really. I mean, occasionally you'll see them there as a big vendor. Like if you go to something like Stitches, you'll see these big yarn brands there representing, but they rarely seem to like be there to sell. They're more there as like a trade show. Partly because they don't sell direct to consumer for the most part. A lot of these yarns, you have to buy them through local yarn stores. But anyway, so there's this subset of brands that we don't really talk about. And the nice thing about them is they tend to be a bit higher quality than the brands that you get at a big box store, but they tend to be a little bit cheaper than the indie dyed brands. So they're kind of the middle ground. If you've been thinking about maybe trying out some hand dyed yarn, but you don't really want to fork over $30 for a 100 gram skein, some of these offer yarns more in the like $8 to $18 range, something in that ballpark. So maybe something you want to put a little bit more money into and a little bit nicer yarn, but not quite the whole way to indie dyed. So I'm going to talk about a few of these brands. First, I'm going to check the comments and just say hello to everybody. So looks like there's a handful of you guys chatting. As always, well, first of all, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining me. And then as always, if you have questions, comments, you want to see something closer, you have a question or comment about something crochet related, but not what I'm talking about, please throw all of that in the live chat. And we'll talk about that as we go. If you're watching this after the live stream's over, throw those down in the comments section, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about whatever yarn-related or crochet-related things that you want to talk about. So I'm going to get started with some of these and just pull out some of the major brands here and show you a few of the things that I just had on hand. And then if you have questions about any of it, go ahead and we'll talk about those. So I'm going to start with one of the bigger brands that's pretty much only available at local yarn store, or is only available at local yarn stores, and that's Cascade Yarns. So this is Cascade 220. Cascade 220 is sort of the ideal yarn that everyone talks about when they're talking about a local yarn store brand. Here, I can turn this around so you can see this. This is a worsted weight yarn. The 220 part of the yarn comes from the fact that there are 220 yards in a 100 gram ball. It makes it really easy if you're at the store and you're trying to figure out what weight yarn it is. I always remember that Cascade 220 is 220 for 100 grams. So it's 220 yards, 200 meters, it's 100 grams, and it is a number 4 weight. One of the things that you'll notice here on the label is that they don't always look like the big box stores. So we're missing that little ball that has a number on it. There's nothing on here to indicate the weight. It doesn't say that it's worsted weight. It doesn't say. So some of that is because the brands aren't quite as standardized in a local yarn store. I always felt like some of it is just to get you to interact with the yarn store owner, and like they lay them out a little bit. Like depending on the shop you go in, sometimes there'll be all the fingering weight yarns and all of the sport weights, and you kind of just get to know how the yarn store is laid out. But I don't know what the real answer is, why they're not labeled just like Red Heart or Lion Brand. I always found it just a little bit frustrating. If I'm at a yarn store, I usually pull my phone out and look it up on Ravelry and get all of the stats on it from there. Or if I know the yarn shop owner, I'll talk with them and see how they feel it works up. But Cascade 220, let's see, I've got some other Cascade yarns in this pile here. This is Cascade Sunseeker. Sunseeker is it's a 47% cotton, 48% acrylic, 5% metallic yarn. It's 100 grams, 237 yards, or 217 meters. That makes it about a worsted weight yarn. And again, you can see the label doesn't indicate all of those things that you might want to see. It does include fiber content, but it is missing the information on the weight of yarn. So some of it you just have to sort of figure out. The rest of it you sort of have to either look into it or talk with somebody about. But yeah, so these actually still have their tags on. I probably should have pulled them off, but Cascade 220 is $11, and it looks like Sunseeker was $8 when I bought these. These are a couple years old, so don't hold me to those prices. But and obviously it'll vary store to store, but that's about the ballpark of yarn we're talking about, the price range that we're talking. Let's see, what else do I have here? This is Cascade Pure Alpaca. It's 100% baby alpaca. 100 grams, 220 yards, also makes it a worsted weight yarn. I love the feel of alpaca. It always feels very cold to the touch. I guess I shouldn't say cold, but cool to the touch. And then this was like $19, so it's a little bit pricier. These are all worsted weight yarns. As with big box stores, I always feel that local yarn stores tend to have a lot more DK, worsted, and heavy weight yarns, though they do usually have a much better selection of sport and fingering and lace weight yarns, typically better than most of the big box stores. Though with Lion Brand putting out as many interesting yarns as they are, that dynamic might change just a little bit, because they're putting out so many weird weights of yarns that stores might start carrying the lower weight yarns. So I think that's all I've got on the table from Cascade. Oh no, I've got a sock yarn from Cascade here. This is Cascade Heritage. It's 75% merino wool, 25% nylon, and this was $12. I don't know why I have all my tags on my Cascade. I might not have prices on everything here, but this was just a really pretty solid purple. I bought it to go with a set of speckled yarn that was hand dyed, like an indie dyed yarn. I wanted an accent color on the edge. I don't think I have that shawl around, but anyway, so this is Cascade. This is a really nice, just basic merino sock yarn. It's $12. That's a much more reasonable price point. If you're trying to get into thinner weight yarns, you want something a little bit better than Lion Brands, but you don't want to go all the way to the $25 skeins from a indie dyer. So this kind of, full disclosure, this will get you sort of hooked on nicer yarns. So once you move up to local yarn store brands, you'll realize how nice like good wool is, and then you'll just want to keep going. They're a little bit of a gateway drug, I guess, as far as yarn goes. So I'm going to slide these guys off to the side and move on to another brand. Just going to check the comments and see. Not much questions, just a lot of hellos. Welcome to everybody who's joined in. We're just talking about some local yarn store brands. All right, so Cascade is one huge name in local yarn stores. One of the other big ones is Encore, and I just pulled a couple of balls of Encore. I have an entire bin of Encore DK weight that I bought when a local yarn store near my mom's house went out of business, probably like 6 or 7 years ago at this point. These are, so Encore yarns come in 100 different colors. I don't even know. These are made by Plymouth. Sorry, this is Plymouth Encore. Encore is sort of their sort of standard, like just basic yarn. Like it's the workhorse yarn. So this is 75% acrylic, 25% wool. The wool does let it soften a little bit better than just 100% acrylic. So you can add a little bit of fabric softener or a little bit of conditioner and get this to soften a little bit more than you would be able to with 100% acrylic. But these are just some standard DK weight yarns. I have pretty much every color in a bin. They're great for baby items. And then Encore also comes in a worsted weight, and I think they also come in a chunky weight, if I remember correctly. But this is another brand, Plymouth, that you'll see a lot at local yarn stores. That's only available at the local yarn store level. I thought I had one more Plymouth yarn here. I think this is Plymouth. This is Plymouth Essex. I don't think they make this anymore, but it's just a sort of an example of something that you can see made out of this, or see that the types of yarns you might see at a local yarn store if you haven't been to one. So this is Essex. These were all named after like big rock groups. This one's called Kiss. There was a couple other ones that were all like related to rock groups. I can't think of what they were at the time. If you're really curious, you could find them on Ravelry. But this is 100% wool. It's 100 grams, approximately 98 yards. It makes it a pretty heavy weight yarn. It's probably a 5 or a 6 chunky yarn. And again, this yarn is not labeled such that it has, you know, that it tells you the standard weights, the 5, 6, in a little ball of yarn. So, Encore DK, I want to say is about $5 or so, if I was guessing. Plymouth Essex, I think, was like $11 for a ball. And it came in a whole bunch of different colors. I could be wrong, but I don't remember these being very expensive. They might even be like $4 because they're only 50-gram balls, I think. Yeah, they're 50 grams, 150 yards. So they might have even only been like $4. But again, I know you can get 75% wool or 75% acrylic, 25% wool yarns at somewhere like Joann Fabric. You won't get the quality or the variety in color typically. So usually when you go into a yarn store, they'll have Encore on like an entire wall in 35 colors. And so if you're looking to make something like amigurumi and you go in and you want something a little bit nicer, or you're trying to make a blanket in a very specific color to match like if you're making it for a baby shower and you're trying to match the colors of the baby's room, you can do things like that because you can go in and buy an entire bag of one color, and generally they have those things in stock or they can get them for you really quickly. So I'm going to slide these off to the side. I think that's all I have in Plymouth yarns on hand. They make just as many yarns as Encore, Cascade. This is what I pulled out of my bins, what I had on hand. So slide these guys off to the side. Let's see, what else do I have here? I think these are Jojo Land. The sticker is covering. Yes. So Jojo Land is another one that's available at a lot of local yarn stores. This one is Melody, and I also have Tonic here. So Melody looks to be, it's a 50-gram ball, it's 220 yards. That makes it about a fingering weight yarn. And then Tonic, I believe, is DK. I made a big scarf for my sister out of this yarn. And what's really cool about this Tonic yarn is that it's got a little bit of black fiber in here. And so it really picks up the light really, like, very differently than, yeah, I don't know if we can zoom in a little bit and see if you can see it a little bit better. But it's got just a little bit of black fiber in there. Whoop, camera's a little tipping around a little bit. But it's got just a little bit of black fiber in there, and it just really makes it way more vibrant. This one is 85% acrylic, 15% wool. Looks like it was $4.95 for a ball. So I think these are 100 grams. Trying to find, yeah, 100 grams, 220 yards, which makes it worsted. And then this Melody Superwash is 100% wool, and it's about a fingering weight and sort of a color changing stripy yarn. So just another brand. Jojo Land is available at a lot of yarn stores. Just kind of give you an idea of what you might see if you walk into a yarn store. And that's not to say that every one of these brands I show you are going to be there, but I do mean that these are the only places you're going to see those yarns. At least for most of these brands, you're pretty much only ever going to see them at a local yarn store or bought secondhand from somebody. Let's see, what else do I have? I've got some yarns from Haiku. This one's Haiku. I think that's it. So Haiku is a brand that I really like, actually. They make a yarn called Simplicity, and I don't have any on hand, but it's a really lofty yarn. So it has really, really nice squish to it. And then I think Simplicity comes in, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it comes in a DK or sport weight, and then it also comes in a worsted. And they just have a really nice squish. They come in bright, vibrant colors. I made my mother-in-law a hat and scarf set, I believe, one year out of Simplicity with some sparkle to it that I really, really liked the way it turned out. So this is Kenzie from Haiku. Kenzie is 100% wool, I think. Oh no, it is 50% New Zealand merino, 25% nylon, 10% angora, 10% alpaca, and 5% silk. So it's a mixed bag here. I do know that this one like puffs up really like fluffy when you work it up. I don't know if I have this worked up. I used to have a shawl made in this, but I'm not sure where it's at offhand. But it looks like this was $4.45 when I bought it. It's a 50-gram ball. I believe it's a DK weight. 50 grams, 160 yards, so it's 320 per 100. So yeah, it should be about DK weight. Then I also have Sueño by Haiku. This is a nice, like, workhorse type of yarn. It's just a really good, solid colors. It came in a lot of pretty colors. I have it in this and in like a green that I have a shawl around here somewhere. I might look around for shawls in a second and round up a few more in local yarn store yarns. It's a big triangle shawl in like a seafoamy type of green. Anyway, this is 100 grams, 233 meters. I think this ends up being somewhere between a DK and a fingering weight, so maybe closer to sport weight. And then I have some Caribou. This yarn I actually bought to put some fluff on. I was going to make, I'm drawing a blank on the reindeer's name in Frozen. But I was making some amigurumi. I was making the reindeer, Sven. And I wanted to put some fluff, and I just didn't end up using this. It's actually a pretty difficult yarn to work with. It's got like little fluff bits on just a sort of thin backbone, similar to an eyelash yarn, but fuzzier. I can't tell you how nice this is to like squish and cuddle with. It looks like this was $7.95. It's 100% nylon, and I can't see any more details because they're wrapped inside. Oh, here, 50 grams, 85 meters. So it's big, fluffy nylon, but if you wanted to add some fluff to an amigurumi or to make the coziest cowl and you really wanted a challenging yarn to work with, this is sort of an option there. And I'm pretty sure that they make this in like all sorts of bright colors too now. They only had it in like animal colors before. All right. Somebody's asking about the stitch definition on the sueño. They just picked some up and they're trying to figure out what to make with it. Give me 1 second. Let me lean over and reach my shawls on here. I know the shawl that I'm looking for is not in the box. It might be in my finished box over there, folded up. Underneath the yarn, there's a box of finished stuff. If I remember correctly, the stitch definition on the sueño was absolutely beautiful. Like it really, you can sort of tell just from the yarn itself that it's got this nice high twist to it. And what high twist means is that you really see the twist and it's really defined. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to have him hand me my big box of shawls there. I think it's in the bottom of that bin, but I'll take the whole bin. So this is my big box of finished stuff that I pull out, and usually I have a little bit closer to me for live streams. It's right here. All right, so it wasn't for nothing. So this is the shawl that I made with sueño. This is another shawl that I did a test pattern for Rachie Newen Designs. It is called something to do with willow. I don't remember if it's weeping willow or sleeping willow or something along those lines, but it's got this shell pattern all the way down the whole way. This was kind of a fun one to work up, but you can really see all of the stitches really well in here. And they just stand up really nicely. It blocked really well. I'm trying to remember, what was this? It was 80% Sleeping Willow. My husband's going to share the link to the shawl, and you can actually see the shawl a little bit better because some of the pictures in the pattern are ours, like on the Ravelry page. So it's 80% merino and 20% viscose from bamboo. So yeah, hopefully you can see the stitch definition pretty well here. It really has beautiful stitch definition. So I think you'd be fine to do any sort of intricate pattern and really be able to see your stitches. One of the things that helps that out is that it's a solid color. And so the more interesting the pattern, the less crazy you want the yarn to be. So I would not want to do cables with a speckled yarn. It's just, there's too much going on. But when you have a solid color, you can go kind of crazy. And that's why I went with this yarn for this pattern, because there's a lot going on and you've got all these fans that are like stacked on top of each other. And so it really shows that off really well. This shawl, I think I used 2 balls for, because I only had 2 of each color, and I still have the 2 of this blue, but I don't have any more of this green. I think this was called like a GNC or something like that, the name of this color. I have no idea if they still make it or not, but you can see that's what it looked like there. Yeah, so somebody else had a question. Stephanie wants to know if any local yarn stores have ombre or variegated yarns like the indie yarns, or like the indie dyed stuff does. So absolutely. There's a couple of things about local yarn stores. The first is that many of them do carry indie dyed brands. So they don't carry as many as you could find on the internet. They usually carry 1 or 2 or maybe 3 different brands of somebody semi-local, it tends to be. So the very first yarn store that I went to was not very far from my house, and there is an indie brand called Leading Men Fiber Arts, and they carried them. They're from Central Illinois. They carried them in this yarn store in Central Illinois, and it was the first indie dyed yarn that I bought, but it was at a local yarn store. So yes, you can get just the indie dyed brands at most local yarn stores, but all of the big brands tend to be on trend. So the trend right now is color changing yarns and ombre yarns and variegated yarns. And so all of the big brands will have solids, but they'll all have on trend type of yarns. Most of what I'm showing you here is not super recent. I pulled this all out of my stash, and so some of these are a little bit older, and so you're probably not seeing the variety that you would if you went into a yarn store. But the short answer there is yes, you should be able to find speckled yarns, you should be able to find variegated yarns, you should be able to find all sorts of solids, pretty much anything you want. And sort of leading right back around to what I was just talking about, this is a mini skein set from Leading Men Fiber Arts that started with basically no speckles and went out to tons of speckles. But I used this Cascade yarn. I had two of these, and one of them is rolled up into a ball, and I used just a little bit of it to do the edging on this shawl. So you can sort of see here, just sort of an example of mixing. This I would consider an indie dyed brand, even if you can get it at some local yarn stores. And then this is definitely a local yarn store brand, which is that Cascade that I showed you. So kind of mix and match as far as that, but I wanted something to pick up the purples in here, and this was a near perfect match for that. So I'm going to kind of set this guy aside. Stephanie mentioned that her store carries Manos del Uruguay, and she's going to go tomorrow, and I have some Manos right here, so I'll show you some of that. Manos del Uruguay is sort of an in-between yarn. It is hand-dyed, but it's not indie dyed, and I say that because it's a big company. When I say indie dyed, I usually mean a company that is 1 or 2 people, usually in their kitchen or garage, that dye yarn, and it might be their only thing that they do, and they go to yarn shows and try and sell their yarn, and they sell on Etsy. That's what I mean when I say indie dyed and hand dyed. Brands like, I'm going to show you a couple of these, but Malabrigo, Manos del Uruguay, Madeline Tosh, they're all bigger companies that still hand dye, but are bigger companies. So that's just so you know, it's not good or bad or no judgment there. Just there's sort of a difference between the companies. Usually what it does mean is that you can get more of that yarn. So you can get a whole bag of one color, where if you buy from an indie dyer, they might have 3 and that's all they have, and they would have to go home and dye you more if you needed sweater quantities. The other difference is that usually batch to batch, the yarns tend to be a little bit more consistent. So despite them being hand dyed, they do a lot more at a time, and you can get more of the same yarn, where with an indie yarn, you might buy a specific color that you really liked in February, and you go back and you see them in October, and that color looks totally different because they couldn't get the same dye, or they did it slightly different, or they learned something new and things have changed. So just sort of keep that in mind if you're going to plan bigger projects where you're going to need a lot of a particular yarn. So back to Manos del Uruguay. This is some really chunky roving style yarn. So you can see that there's basically no twist. In some spots, this yarn is barely twisted together. It's more like felted together. This is 100% wool. It's 100 grams, 138 yards, which I think puts it squarely into a 5 category. Might be a 6. It's kind of hard to tell. Let's see. It doesn't really have much information. There is a location and artisan who made this yarn in here. But it's all produced in Uruguay and assembled by women who work in cooperatives, sort of with the mission to empower the women in those areas, and give them productive work to do there. So, yeah, these are kettle dyed. There's just kind of some information I'm just glancing through here. But this is the wool Classica. And then this, I don't know why it doesn't have a tag on it, but I'm positive this is Manos del Uruguay. This is one of my favorite colorways. I think this is the 3rd time I've bought it. This is, let me try and remember here. It is Manos del Uruguay Alegria, or I think it's Alegria. And then the name of the color is Acero, Acero. It's a fingering weight yarn. It's mostly wool. I don't know if it's got some nylon mixed into it. But like I said, I somehow have managed to lose the tag, but I'm positive that that's the right brand and the right colorway. But yeah, this is a perfect example of a color changing yarn. This one would work up somewhat speckled, less speckled than this shawl that I showed you, but it'll sort of speckle because of the way the color wraps around. I don't have this shawl anymore. I gave it away, the one that I had made out of this yarn, which is why I bought more of this yarn.
Do you have a picture on the Ravelry of it though?
Yeah, it's called Sylvan Lake is the one that I made out of this, and there should be a picture. My husband's looking for a picture to share. Otherwise, it'll be in the OneDrive. So, I'm going to set this guy aside. He's going to try and share a picture with you guys. It'll be a Ravelry link, but you should be able to see the shawl directly. I guess there's a bunch of questions. All right, so Tamika asked if I recommend starting off with Cascade if you're going to start with a local yarn store. I sort of recommend just going and touching yarn. If you have a project in mind that you really want to work on, like I said, I really like 100-gram fingering weight shawls. So a lot of times I'll just go and know that I'm going to buy 100 grams of fingering weight. And so that might be Cascade, it might be Manos del Uruguay, it might be something even fancier than that. If you have a particular budget in mind, you can go with that in mind and just stick to your budget. But if you're just looking to see what's out there, I would just go and touch all of the yarn and see what you like. I don't have any particular attachment or any issues with Cascade. I've always liked them as a brand, but I don't think you have to start there. If there's something that catches your eye and you just want to try it out, I would say go for it. A lot of crochet is just experimenting with stuff, and if you want to try some nicer stuff from a local yarn store or an indie brand, you can just go for it, is really all I can say. Let's see. So Anna's asking what could I make with one skein of the wool Classica? She picked one up on sale and she hasn't figured out what to do with it. For this weight of yarn with only one skein, I would say that maybe you're looking at just a really simple cowl. Pick up kind of a little bit heavier hook and just start working. I've found, so I always thought when I made a cowl that I wanted it to drape down here, and I've found that I really prefer a cowl that sits much closer to my throat, which is weird because I don't like anything really touching my throat. But as far as a cowl goes, I like them to be up a little bit more snug. That may be partly due to the fact that I actually really want them for the warmth and not just for accessory purposes. But you can make a relatively small cowl in diameter and still pull it down over your head. I don't know that there's enough in just one of these balls to make a hat. It would probably make a pretty nice hat. Based on feel, I don't think this is superwash wool, so you would have to expect that it's going to felt and it's going to shrink if you handle it too much. But I definitely think a cowl could work out of this yarn. You might be able to get a pair of fingerless gloves, but they would be very bulky. So I don't know that I would go that route. I think definitely I would go cowl. You don't really have enough to make a whole scarf. So you could make a style of cowl that's worked. If you don't like to work in the round, you could make the style that's flat and then you button. And that gives you a little bit of adjustability. So that's an option. You could work a flat rectangle basically and then put buttons on the end and just button it closed. You don't really, with yarn this big, as long as you don't use massive buttons, you don't really even have to make buttonholes because they should just kind of fit in between your stitches. So you can basically just work a flat piece and sew buttons on and then wrap it and just pop the buttons through and they should hold just in between your stitches. If you want to make buttonholes, you just would do a chain and a skip a stitch and that'll leave a gap for you. So Runaway Needle Red was asking if the Sylvan Lake shawl that my husband posted was only 100 grams, and it was. I know that's relatively astounding based on its size. The mannequin that it's on is a size 4 model, so if that helps you a little bit kind of gauge size. But yeah, it blocks out huge. That shawl really, really takes advantage of having a really small amount of yarn go a really long way. I think, do you see the shawl? I don't see it. I think it's hanging at work. It's that one that you don't, the pastel one that you don't, he doesn't like the colors on, but I have another one of the Sylvan Lake shawls made out of indie yarn that I don't see around here. I was just going to hold it up and show it, but it's done in like bright pastel colors, but it's really nice because it's that he posted a link so you can see what we're talking about. But that pattern works up really, really open. And it's basically almost all chains and single crochets, and so it takes almost no yarn to do like huge sections of the shawl. So yeah, that's only 100 grams done for that whole shawl, and most of that weight goes to the edging, because if I remember correctly, it's got a relatively solid edging. All right, Stephanie's asking if I can give a mini overview on shawls and what patterns for a first timer and favorite yarns to use, how do you wear them, etc. Sure, I can do all of those things. So, obviously you've heard me talk repeatedly about 100-gram fingering weight shawls. If you go back through some of my live streams, there's somewhere I was talking about using Ravelry and doing like the most effective searching. So if you go to Ravelry and you go to the just the blank patterns page, there's a spot on the right hand side about halfway down that'll have like a bunch of categories, and you can click shawl and it'll just open a blank search of all the shawls. on the side, there's a whole bunch of check boxes, and you can check the weight of the yarn you want to use and how much of it. And so if I was just looking for 100-gram fingering weight shawls, I go on and I do a blank search for just shawls. I check fingering weight and light fingering weight, and then I choose the 400 to 500 yards, and that gets you 1 ball of fingering weight yarn. And those numbers might be a little off. It might be 400 to 550 or something like that, but that gets you one ball. And that'll give you a whole list of all of the shawls, and you can just find something you like. But as far as recommendations, for an absolute beginner shawl, I would recommend that you go to Moogly Blog and find their Fortune Shawlette. And that's for a number of reasons. One, because I love the way that shawl works up. It works up really nice and open. I've made it probably 9 or 10 times at this point. I think there's at least 2 of them within arm's reach right now. But the Fortune Shawlette is one of my favorites. It also comes as a fully written pattern. She has left and right-handed tutorials, and she has charts. And so I don't think she could possibly give you any more information on how to do that shawl. It's also a modified corner-to-corner stitch. So if you're struggling with it still after looking at her tutorials, you could check out my corner-to-corner tutorial. It's exactly the same pattern as just the regular corner-to-corner, but you skip 1 double crochet and replace it with a chain instead when you're working your blocks. And so it's very easy to work up. You basically just work it until it's about as big as you want it to be, and then you close off the top, and then there's some edging. You can do the edging or you can skip it depending on your skill level. If you're just not ready to do it, it still looks nice with no edging. So that would be my first. If you're just an absolute beginner and you want to make your first shawl, that would be the one that I would recommend. And there's a link now in the live stream. After that, I would definitely recommend, and I've recommended her patterns several times before, anything by Rachie Newen Designs, especially some of the stuff that she published about a year and a half ago. She was really, really into 100-gram fingering weight shawls, primarily triangular shapes. She's got all sorts of different shapes, but I've tested patterns for her for a couple of years. I haven't done it this year, really, just because of timing. I've mentioned before, she tests on really tight deadlines, and I just don't have the time that I used to devote to them. But she writes she makes absolutely beautiful shawls. She writes very, very carefully. Everything is really well explained, and I think you couldn't go wrong with anything you like from her. I'm trying to think of some other designers that I really like, and nobody in particular. There's a lot of shawls that I really like, but no particular designers are coming to mind right now.
Do you have a Fortune Shawlette to show?
Yeah, I can pull a Fortune Shawlette up to show. So let's see. Okay. Oh yeah. So she also asked yarn. So really anything you want, and I'll explain that in a second. So this is a Fortune Shawlette done with Shawl and a Cake. Shawl and a Cake, I think, is listed as a 3 or 4 weight, and it really works up more like a 1 or 2 weight yarn. It's much finer than they say it is. So this is a fully worked up Fortune Shawlette, and then I've got another one over here that I think I skipped the edging on. Whoops, it's caught under the plywood. Hold on one second. Nope, it just was caught. Sorry. So this is also a Fortune Shawlette. One of the things about this pattern is it does tend to collapse back down on itself after a couple of wears. So to fix that, really what I do, I have a number of blocking videos. You can watch how I block a shawl. But to fix a shawl that keeps collapsing, really all you do is re-wet it and re-block it. And every time you block it, you don't have to put in 100 pins. You can literally just put a pin on each corner and maybe a couple along the side and just get it to open back up a little bit. This one was worked in a worsted weight yarn. So again, you can, when I say you can use anything you want, you literally can use anything you want. This was 2 balls of worsted weight. This one was 1 ball of shawl in a ball, and it made a gigantic shawl. Like I said, I always go for 100-gram fingering weight shawls. So that is any 1 ball this size. You can make up a triangle shawl like this without really any issue. There's tons and tons of patterns where you can get 100 grams to make 1 good shawl. And then additionally, she asked how you wear it. So a triangle shawl like this, I pretty much always gather like this and go like this. And audio might get a little muffled because it's underneath the shawl, but I usually wear them like this. If I have a, I don't have a mirror in front of me and I don't have the camera facing me, so something like this. Usually these guys get tucked in a little bit. And then usually if I'm wearing a shawl, I usually have some sort of jacket on, and I usually like to tuck it in so that the zipper comes up here and it bunches really nice. If I'm not wearing a jacket or something like that, then it just sort of looks like this, and that's fine too. But I usually take the ends and wrap them around and wear them like this. If I was showing a shawl the other day, for example, this one is also a single ball of yarn. It's 100-gram fingering weight shawl. This is the Black Comb shawl, also by Rachel Nguyen Designs. This one is a half hexagon, and so it can be worn over the shoulders, and it just stays. You don't need a shawl pin or anything like that. It'll just hang out like this all day long. I've got a couple other shawls. Just trying to look and see what I've got here to show off. That was talented. What else can I show off here? So if you go with a really gigantic shawl, so this one was 200 grams of fingering weight yarn. This is the shawl that I wore for my wedding. There's pictures on Instagram and Facebook. You can see. This one can be worn, and I wore this over my dress like this. But I wear it all the time like a triangle shawl. So if I'm wearing just like a jacket in the fall, I'll turn it around. And usually I spend a little time in the mirror trying to tuck these ends and get everything to lay right. And then we'll pull this up so that it bunches nicely up here, sort of tucked into my jacket. So that's how I wear these. There's one other style shawl. I probably have one here. Yeah. This pattern is called Big Love. I don't remember who the designer is, but my husband will find it, I'm sure. And is it white on the top, the very first one? Yes, that's it then. This is Fiber Optic Yarns. Fiber Optic Yarns has a really cool, if you ever get a chance to see them at a yarn show, you should definitely go just look at their booth because it's very cool just to walk around. They lay their yarns out beautifully. But one of the things that they do that I've never seen anyone else do is they do gradient yarns where they will sell you both terminal ends. So this yarn goes from damson to gold, and damson is this bright blue color, or this deep blue color, I guess. And it goes blue, purple, sort of a eggplant color, rust red, orange, and then gold. So you get this gradient effect. It's a hand-dyed gradient. But then when you're buying from them, you can either buy the blue end or the gold end to extend your shawl. So in this case, what I did is I worked the whole blue skein and then switched to the gradient and picked up the blue and worked it all the way out to the gold. I could have also worked the whole gradient and then picked the blue up, and this whole section down here would have been blue, where the inner part would have been gold. And so you could have worked it the other way around. I could have also bought the gold end and done gold, big chunk of gold, and this whole chunk would have been all gold, and then the gradient would have gone the other way, ending with blue fringe at the end. But they have a bunch of different colors where they'll sell you both ends, and I've never seen another dyer do that when they do gradients. Usually gradient dyers just dye gradients, it seems. So these people offered, they had both ends to the gradient, so they had solid colors available, and then they had variegated. Similar colors to this, but they wouldn't change. They would speckle when they work up. All right. Okay. Runaway Needle suggested Fiber Spiders Easy Breezy Shawl. So that's an option for somebody looking for a beginner shawl. And then just people commenting. The one other thing that I was going to show here real quick is there's another style shawl, and that's the asymmetrical triangle. And so that works up. This is the Lizard Shawl by Morbin Designs or Jasmine. I'm going to clear some yarn off here. Just slide these over to my bucket. Oh, that's a mess. They kind of fell everywhere. I'm going to move some of these guys off to the side here so that I can lay this out a little bit more. This is another yarn by Leading Men Fiber Arts. This is their BFL base. BFL is Blue-Faced Leicester. It's a particular type of sheep that gives a not very soft wool. So merino wool is just really soft and lofty and really just beautiful yarn. BFL is a little scratchier and a little stiffer, but it gives just absolutely the most beautiful stitch definition. For those of you who might not be familiar with the term, stitch definition is how well your stitches stand out. And so you can see I have worn this shawl countless times, and every one of these stitches is still standing up beautifully. The lacy sections here are still really open and holding their shape. When I showed you that the Fortune Shawlette, you could see that like the stitches had collapsed down, and I can't even get these to collapse. Like, they won't collapse in on themselves. They just curl, like they just move. Where this shawl, the yarn is collapsing, and when I pull it apart, it'll spread out, but it wants to collapse back on itself. So this shawl I would wear by taking the triangle part and trying to get it about to the center of my back, and usually I have somebody tell me where that is. And then I'll wrap this part here, and I always use a shawl pin for this style of shawl. Hobby Lobby has a really good selection of brooches. Otherwise, I actually have shawl pins that are like a round piece of wood with a stick that goes through them. If there's any down here, they'd be on the wall. So, that didn't pin, but you get the general idea here of you'd put a pin here to hold it, to keep it from falling off repeatedly. If you don't put a pin in, it will just keep falling off. So these are also from Hobby Lobby. This is what I typically wear with my shawls, is this round shawl pin. I have like 6 of these. I bought them all on clearance at Hobby Lobby. I bought all of the ones that they had. But you just take a stick like this and pop it through. And try not to damage your stitches. It is relatively easy to split the yarn, so you just got to be careful going through them. But wears like this, and it lays really nicely. Covers my arms if I've got something sleeveless on. It's relatively lightweight, but this one I really, really like to wear to yarn shows and stuff like that, because the stitch definition on it is just absolutely stunning. And so everyone always compliments it because it just looks so nice because those stitches stand up. That being said, it doesn't feel amazing like merino, but it looks really, really good. So you can't have everything with every type of wool. And then this is just a different style of the same, or different iteration of the same type of shawl pin. So this is just a square. I've seen these all different styles. I did a exchange one time with someone, and I sent them an apple-shaped one because they really liked apple decorations. I've seen like little birds and stuff, but it's basically just a shape and a stick, and that's all. You can also get shawl pins that are just the stick. Like the little shape is actually not 100% necessary. What you would do then is just weave it back and forth a couple of times and just leave the stick. So that's an option as well. But this is a different style shawl. This one is done in 150 grams. So Leading Men Fiber Arts sells their BFL in 150 gram balls. And so this is 150 grams to do this shawl. I don't think you could do it in 100 grams. It just would not be big enough. Unless you were a relatively tiny person, because 100 grams would probably end about here. And so you really wouldn't get much depth on this shawl by the time you worked it. It is worked from the narrow end, though, so that does help you out a little bit, because if you just run out, it's just a little bit smaller. But again, this is the lizard pattern. I think the designer's name is Jasmine Rosson, R-A-S-S-N or something like that, S-S-E-N. He's going to put the link in the live chat as well. All right, so I'm going to clear some of this off of here. Hopefully that helps answer some of your questions about shawls. If you have more questions, please ask them. And yep, I'm just kind of gazing through there. I'm going to go back to some of the local yarn store brands, just because we sidetracked a little bit. This, and I had a cowl in, there it is. So this yarn here is by a company called Malabrigo. Malabrigo is one of those brands that I was mentioning, is hand dyed but not indie dyed necessarily. This happens to be mulberry silk, which is pure silk made from silkworms that are only fed specific mulberries. What's that? Mulberry leaves. And so it is ultra soft. I have a couple of skeins of this. They're 50 grams. 50 grams, 225 yards. That makes them fingering weight yarn. They were made in Peru, it says. Oh, and this is called Mora, and the colorway is Aguas. But this is probably about as on the expensive end of local yarn stores as you'd go. These were originally $22 per skein, and they're only 50 gram skeins. But again, keep in mind they're 100% silk. So there's sort of that trade-off there. But you can go very expensive at a local yarn store. Some of them carry quite expensive yarns, but generally they tend to be in the middle bracket between indie dyed and big box store. So this is Malabrigo. Malabrigo also makes one of my very favorite worsted weight yarns. The line is called Rios, I believe. This is one that I made out of some Rios. It's a cowl called the Sweetheart Cowl. I got the pattern from Happily Hooked magazine, but I believe it's available on a blog for the designer who made this. Has it on her blog for free, I think. But this is a really simple cowl to work up. The tricky part is that it starts on this end with the chains and these little picots, and then you have to work the granny stitches on top of this. And so it's really, really easy to twist this bottom chain. I've made this cowl a couple times, and what I always do is chain and then use stitch markers and pin it together so it can't twist. Yes. This is a Sweetheart Cowl. This is one of my absolute favorite cowls. I wear this probably 3 days a week in the winter. It goes really well with my hair. And it looks like I've actually broken a stitch here that I'm going to have to repair at some point. So I would love to do a repair video and show you how to do some crochet repair, but it's really tricky to teach because each repair is slightly different. So I might be able to teach a general approach, but actually doing repair work is a little bit challenging just because it's sort of a puzzle to figure out how are you going to get a chain that broke through a set of stitches that's already made. And so you got to do some sort of fancy footwork to get through that. But this is a cowl that wears pretty close up to my throat and like lays really nice. And there's that hole again. Wants to just keep showing up. But just wears really nice, and then with a jacket or like my winter coat, it bunches really nice and stays pretty warm. So this is Malabrigo yarn. Again, I'm pretty sure that this is called Rios. I don't remember the color, but yeah. So I'm going to set this guy. This was one skein of worsted weight Malabrigo. It's probably about 200 yards or so of worsted weight yarn. So just one skein. I don't think I was able to work up the whole pattern, so I think the pattern calls for it to be a little bit taller. And I just finished off where I was at, and then I think it looks like I did I just finished on a repeat. So there's no additional stitches or anything on here, like a top edging of any sort, but I don't believe the pattern calls for anything. So if you work a pattern and you're just happy with the thickness that it turns out and you're out of yarn, you can just stop. There's no reason that you have to just keep going to finish off the pattern or buy more yarn. This cowl is as tall as I need it to be. So like I said, I'm pretty sure it called for like 3 or 4 more rounds and I didn't have enough yarn, but it works out just fine. And like I said, it's one of my favorite cowls ever. So it's looking a little ragged. Let's see. Additional yarn store brands. So this was the only yarn I could find from Madeline Tosh that I hadn't worked up. It's already been balled up. This is Tosh Sock, I'm pretty sure. Let's see what the thing says here. Pull this over here so you can see it a little bit better. Madeline Tosh, oh, this is Merino Light. It's 100% wool. It's in the color Neon Peach. It's fingering weight, 420 yards, 100-gram ball. But yeah, so this says it's hand-dyed in Texas from wool ethically sourced in South Africa. So again, hand-dyed, but not indie-dyed necessarily. This is a little bit more expensive. It looks like this I paid $23 for. So A little bit more expensive than the Cascade yarns, which were in like the $12 to $15 range, but you could get it at a local yarn store and get to feel and touch it. I think a lot of people, what stops them from buying yarns online is that you don't know if you're going to get total garbage, because you never know if, well, one, how it feels, and two, if it's going to look the way it looks in the pictures that they've got posted. I do have one shawl worked up in Madeline Tosh yarn. I was able to find. I know I've worked up a bunch, but I'm pretty sure I've given most of them to my mom at this point. So this is Tosh Sock. Tosh Sock is one of my favorite fingering weight yarns because it has a really, really high twist. And again, that means that you can really see the twist. This is merino light, and it has basically no visible twist. It's basically roving, and I don't know if you can really see that very well, but there's really just no twist to it whatsoever. Like it's lightly twisted. Tosh Sock is the extreme opposite. It's a plied yarn, and it has a really hard twist. It makes it not very squishy, but I always really like the way it looks. I'm pretty sure the name of this color was Steam Age. We're going to zoom in a little bit so you can sort of see the stitches. But it just gives it a really different texture than if you work up something with a lot less twist to it. So I'm pretty sure this was called Steam Age. And this is another Rachel Newen pattern. It's the Capricios shawl. And I think we can get you a link to that as well. So again, welcome to anybody who's joining us. We're just talking about some local yarn store brands. We have a tendency to talk about big box brands, and we have a tendency to talk about indie dyed brands on here, but a lot of times I neglect the in-between brands, which are the local yarn store and the hand-dyed but not indie-dyed yarns. So we're just kind of chatting about some of those today. And as always, if you've got questions, put those in the live chat. If you're new here and you'd like to see more content from the channel, please hit subscribe. If you are a subscriber but you don't seem to be getting notifications, double check that next to the subscribe button there should also be a little bell. And if you hit that bell, there should be some sort of drop-down menu that will let you choose all notifications or personalized notifications. And if you're only on the personalized, you don't get all of the notifications. And then if you like this video or you like my channel, go ahead and hit like on the video. That helps other people see the videos so that YouTube knows to distribute the videos out a little bit to new people so that they can find the channel. So moving on from Madeline Tosh, I'm going to go to, this is Sublime. This is Baby Cashmere Merino Silk. It is really nice, soft stuff. It was a little bit pricey, but I don't think for it being cashmere and silk, I want to say it was still only like $11 for the ball. I bought this to make, there's a couple of really cute ragdoll patterns. I made a giraffe and I made a dog, and they call for the sheep's yarn from the Netherlands, and I wanted to try and find something that I could use to make the giraffe that I didn't have to import from the Netherlands. And so I came across these and I thought they'd make a really cute baby giraffe. Both the giraffe and the dog I've given away as baby shower gifts, so I don't have them to show. But the little ragdoll patterns are really cute. If you search for ragdoll patterns on Ravelry, there's some really cute ones, and they're all made with the sheep's yarn. And honestly, I would strongly recommend that you get that yarn because they just look so professional when they're done. There's something about that yarn, and I can't really explain the quality of how the stitches look when they're done, but it looks like a product that you would pay for at like a high-end designer store. The stitches look beautiful. and that the pattern really just worked out really well for me. But I did buy this yarn to make a little baby giraffe, because I thought they were kind of like diluted baby colors for a giraffe. But I haven't worked them up because, like I said, the sheep's yarn turned out really, really well. If you do want to order that yarn, the best selection that I've found is from Wool Warehouse. They're out of the UK, so it's woolwarehouse.co.uk. And their shipping was surprisingly reasonable. I think it was $4.99 to ship to the US, and it was here inside a week. It might actually be better than Joann Fabric, who at this point has the worst shipping that I deal with on a regular basis. Their shipping takes well over a week and is always expensive unless you buy a whole bunch of stuff and get to their free shipping cutoff. And then everything that they ship free is slow. So, anyway, I would say that Wool Warehouse beats them out shipping-wise. But this is Sublime. It's just another brand that you might find in a local yarn store. Let's see, what else do I have? This is yarn from the Imperial Stock Ranch. This is a really, really rough wool. You can, and intentionally so. It's not a negative thing. There's a whole stack of those sitting next to me on these sticks that everybody always asks about. But these are all Imperial Stock Ranch yarns, in various colors. I've got a whole bunch more. I bought all of these. Again, I've talked about that yarn store that went out of business, near my mom's house when I just had started crocheting. And I bought a whole bunch of stuff. But I've got that in a bunch of colors. This is a really, really heavy wool. I've made a couple hats out of this, and they're like the warmest hats ever. It's a heavy, heavy wool. But you can, if you pick through here, you can find like little bits of like what seem to be hay and stuff. It's a rough wool. It's also not superwash, so it will felt on you if you don't care for it properly. And maybe you intend to felt it. So you can intentionally make a hat too big and then felt it down and make it more stiff and more fabric-like. That's a thing that people do, and it's an aesthetic some people like. But if you make it and you don't intend for it to felt, it'll get too small to wear. I have an alpaca hat that I absolutely loved, and it accidentally went through the wash machine. I'd put it in the pocket of my coat, and I washed my coat and didn't realize the hat was in there, and it felted, and now it's too small for me to wear. So, it can happen that you can shrink things. But anyway, so there's not a whole lot of information on here. It looks like it's a 2-ply, it's 4 ounce, so 4 ounces, I think it's just over 100 grams. I think it's like 113 grams. And it looks like it's approximately 200 yards. So probably about a number 5 yarn. So just another brand you might see at yarn store or local yarn store. Chad's noting that Premier has pricey shipping too. I did go to buy, so Premier had a huge sale going on, and I was gonna buy stuff from them, and then I just ended up not placing the order, not for any particular reason. So I don't have any experience with shipping Premier. Generally, I just buy Premier from Joann Fabric directly. So I haven't bought anything from their website, so I can't say, but yeah. I think, at least in my case, I'm ultra spoiled by Amazon. I get really used to not paying for shipping ever, and I want everything to show up in 2 days, which I know is not a realistic expectation from every single vendor. They don't have the staff and the ability to ship that fast, but if it's going to take more than a week, I basically don't order it. It's just sort of how things happen. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit too demanding. So this is from Kramer Yarns, called Perfection Lights. It's a worsted weight yarn. It's 28% merino, 70% acrylic, and 2% polyester. This, I don't believe is stellina, but it's mixed in the same way as stellina, and I don't know if you can see the sparkle real well, but it's not wrapped around. So I had some Sunseeker out earlier. Sunseeker actually has a thread in here. There's a single strand of yarn in here that is wrapped around the whole thing. This is fiber mixed in, and I can go in and I can pick out, well, not very easily, but I can pick out the shiny bits, and they're long, thin fibers of sparkle. And so this, sometimes you'll hear me talking about stellina. This is similar to stellina. It might be the same thing. Generally, stellina is listed as stellina on a label and not polyester. But anyway, so you get these little sparkly fibers, and one, I think it makes it a little bit more sparkly because it catches the light all different all at the same time. And two, it's usually a little bit softer and a little bit easier to work with. When you work with something like Sunseeker where it's wrapped around, this one's integrated a little bit more and is done a little bit better, but there are cheaper brands that will wrap in a sparkly thread. And as you're working, the thread, the sparkly part can slide down, and then all of a sudden you'll get like a big ball of it and have to either make like one sort of knotted stitch with like a big ball of sparkly stuff, or sort of keep sliding it down or like cut it out, and it can kind of make a mess. So the end result is I prefer this style where it's spun into the yarn versus the kind where it's wrapped around. But I don't know of any big box store brands that have stellina in them. They're all wrapped style yarns. So if you want to try something that sparkles like this, you will have to either go to a local yarn store or a yarn show or like Etsy and get it from an indie dyer. But again, these are Kramer yarns. Kramer also makes all sorts of solids and speckled and other yarns. I just happen to have this sparkly stuff on hand. Clear a little bit more out of here. Just, let's see, what else do I have? This is a yarn. I pulled this out because I was able to get this locally, and it's very similar in look to the River Washed XL yarns. So I've shown some of the Stone Washed and River Washed by Sheeps before. They have this heathered look to them. Those are the ones that I was saying that you have to import from the Netherlands. This has a very similar look to the XL version, which is a like a 4 or 5 weight yarn. Yeah, this is a 4. So this is a 70% cotton and 30% acrylic yarn. This was just available domestically. I don't know how prevalent this brand is. I just know that my yarn store carries it. It's not one that I've heard of much online, like people saying that they've used them. So, but it's just another option. So you can always go to your yarn store and look around and see what they've got before you go to the trouble of getting something from Wool Warehouse in the UK. It might also help you in a pinch, like if you just need a little bit of something and you don't have time to wait for it to come in from the internet. Having a good yarn store that you've picked out near you can sort of cover those stopgaps. So that's really all I had to talk about today. Just wanted to sort of touch on the local yarn store brands. Ravelry has a okay yarn store finder. If you look in their, if you go to the yarn tab and scroll down on the left-hand side of the page, there's a like search where you can look and see, you can look up by zip code and, you know, find local yarn stores. You have to be a little bit careful because they have a bad habit of having yarn stores that have closed, or they'll list dyers, so like indie dyers, as a yarn store where they don't actually have a store front. So it'll just be like their billing address, and you can't go there and shop for anything. So I would say use the search, but then call ahead and make sure that they, one, exist, and two, are open before you make the trip. I have one yarn store. So a couple of years ago, there were 3 yarn stores in the area, 3 or 4 in the area, and we're down to 1. And they're open pretty good hours. They're generally weekends. I think she's closed Monday, so they sort of have limited hours. So my suggestion would be to find their hours from Facebook or something like that, or call ahead. But if you're willing to travel a little bit, usually you can find some sort of local yarn store within an hour of yourself, like an hour of most places, it seems like. Ravelry also has a feature where you can put in where you're starting from and where you're going to end, and it will use Google Maps and find you yarn stores along your trip. So if you're going somewhere anyway, and it will find you stops along the way that you can sort of make a road trip out of, if you've got time to add those into your trip. So. Sure. Actually, that might be a better topic for next week since it's getting late already. So what my husband was asking is, we were going to show how to take a yarn like this and turn it into this. So for those of you who've been crocheting a while, that might seem obvious, but I know when I started out, I had no idea what to do with this. You can't just open it up and start using it. You have to turn it into something usable, and whether that's a cake that you wind on a yarn winder, or on a yarn winder, or whether it's a hand-rolled ball. So maybe next week we'll start by talking about how you turn a hank of yarn into a cake of yarn, and then I'll share with you my absolute favorite yarn baller, and some cheaper options that I've used in the past that work just fine for somebody getting started. But realistically, you can absolutely bare minimum to turn this into a ball. You're looking at like a $10 or $12 investment if you buy from Amazon. And you can go crazy from there. You can spend hundreds of dollars, but we'll talk about all of that, I think, next week, just because it's starting to get a little bit late. One of the things I will talk about real quick and just share some updates with you guys. So I've shown this blanket several times now, and I've been promising an edging on it. And I finally got the edging done, and the tutorial is just about ready to go. And so that should be coming out sometime this week. But this blanket is finally done. It's a nice small baby blanket, and I'm really happy with the way the edging turned out here. So hopefully you can see this. But I went with the dual arch edging, and it's a really simple... It's a really simple chain border, and then you do another row of chains and you interlock the stitches. So it works out really cool. I think it's very beginner friendly. It can go on any blanket. If you like this particular stitch pattern on the blanket, this is my interlocking shell stitch. And there is a tutorial already available on the channel for this stitch. If you want to see the edging tutorial, now would be a great time to subscribe and make sure that you've got all of the notifications on, because again, this will be coming out later this week. And so you can follow that edging tutorial. This yarn is Premier DK Colors. I think I used 3 balls to do the whole blanket. So about 2.5 to do the body of the blanket, and then about another 1/4 to 1/3 of the last ball to do the edging. And this is fully expandable. You can make it wider, you can make it longer. This interlocking shell stitch just works up to a really nice dense fabric. And then this dual arch or double arch border just works up to the tiniest amount of ruffle on the edge. Just something interesting to look at the edge. It's also a little bit forgiving in that if you weren't perfectly even on your edges, that the wave will sort of hide that a little bit. So it's a nice border for those who are beginning, because your tension might not be perfect on your edges, and so it'll hide that for you a little bit. So this is coming soon, so you can get that edging tutorial very soon. So I'm gonna set this guy aside, and then maybe last week's live stream I showed this yarn. It could have been 2 weeks ago. Live streams are starting to blur together just a little bit. This is the Lion Brand's Beautiful Hue. It's a relatively new yarn. I don't know if it's brand new like the stuff that I unboxed, but it is one of the yarns that I got, I think, last week's live stream. So one of the things that I noted when I unboxed this yarn was that this color, pumice stone, had a bunch of these like little twisty side bits that are kind of a mess. And I think I found, there's 2 of them I can see right here. I think there was a third one that I tucked in. But it had these blemishes or problems along here. I have not run into a problem while I've been working on this. And what I'm working on here is a fingerless glove pattern to share with you guys. So it's not totally done yet. I'm just making the thumb portion, and then there will be a couple more rounds to cover my hand. And then the other glove, I will, now that I've got the pattern figured out, I will do the tutorial with the other glove, and should be able to get this pattern out to you somewhat soon, but I wouldn't say is coming in the next week or so. This will be a little bit more involved for filming, so it'll be a little while before I get this to you, but it is coming attraction. So again, I've said it a bunch of times this stream, and I apologize, but if you're not subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed so that you get notifications when we release future videos. If you like this video, you like the live stream format, please let me know in the comments section or in the live chat if you're watching this while the video is still live. But yeah, so just let me know, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Anything you can do helps me out. It also means that you get notifications about the content more readily. So yeah, that's all coming soon type of stuff. Somebody's asking about a yarn swift. So yes, I would say, at least for me, I would think that a yarn swift is more important than a yarn winder. And they're probably close to equal importance. If you buy one before the other, you probably could make an argument either way, but I think the swift is actually more important because I've untangled 3 or 4 really, really badly tangled hanks of yarn, and I hate doing it every time. So I would say absolutely I use a yarn swift, and if you're prioritizing one over the other, I would say probably I would go yarn swift first. My swift, I think, cost $11, and it's a folding umbrella style swift, and I can show that off. I'll show you real quick. No, I've got mine here. So this is a yarn swift, and I'll show how to use this next week when I show how to ball up the yarn. But basically, you put the loop around and you make it wide, and it holds the yarn for you, and then it spins freely. And so you can pull your yarn off. But I think I would rather handball than fight a tangled skein of yarn. So, but realistically, you can get this for $11 to $15 shipped. You can get an okay yarn baller for about the same amount of money. So for about $30, if you're going to go make the switch into hanked yarn, I definitely think it's worth it. One of the benefits to going to a local yarn store is that almost every single one of them will ball the yarn for you. I don't know that I've ever been to a store that doesn't at least offer a swift and a winder that you can use yourself. But most of them will do it for you. A lot of them now have motorized winders, so that nobody has to hand crank the winder. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the big benefits of shopping at a yarn store is that you can have the yarn balled up. Some indie dyers, if you order from like their Etsy page, they'll have like a little add-on for like an extra $1. They'll wind it up for you and ship it to you in a ball so that you can use it right away. But not all of them offer that. But yeah, just as a rounding back to yarn stores, that's another benefit to going there. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's something really nice about just being able to go and touch and feel the yarn and shop around. It's a small business. If you enjoy supporting small businesses in your area. Yeah. Many of them offer classes and tutorials like in store, so you get personalized help. I go every week on Wednesday nights to a meetup in my area. And we used to meet at a yarn store nearby. That yarn store has since closed down for personal reasons. For the owner had to shut down. But the group of women that I used to crochet, and a lot of them are knitters, we all still get together every week. We just meet at the library now, but yarn stores are a great place to meet other yarn people. One of the things that I will mention is that not every yarn store is for every person. Sometimes they can have a cliquey environment, and other stores are very relaxed, and each store has a different atmosphere. So if you go in a yarn store and you don't really care for it, I wouldn't write off all yarn stores. I would keep going to other yarn stores. It can be more difficult to find yarn stores that cater to crocheters, just because more people tend to knit. So if you are a crocheter only, I wouldn't necessarily expect to find a whole huge selection of crochet hooks, things like that, though most stores cater to both, if not equally, at least well enough that everyone should feel comfortable shopping in a store that the owner may only knit, but will generally be able to find you somebody who can help with crochet-related issues in person. So typically, the yarn store get-togethers happen in the evenings, usually in the middle of the week. I've noticed like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday tend to be big days for yarn store get-togethers. Most of them are free and have no expectation that you are going to be buying anything or that you only use yarn that you bought there. I don't know of any yarn stores that would be offended if you brought Red Heart with you and just wanted to meet up with people. The reality is that if you're anything like me, you'll probably end up buying something there anyway. So whether it's out of their clearance section or whether it's just a crochet hook or just some stitch markers or something like that, or if you spend $300 on yarn, any of those things tend to happen. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of look and see what you guys have to say about if there's any more comments or questions. Yeah, Michelle's mentioning that that her library has a Tuesday night one. If you don't have a local yarn store near you with a knitting or crochet meetup, A lot of times community centers and libraries will have get-togethers. For those of you who are younger viewers, those groups tend to have older demographics. It just is the reality. But I really, really enjoy them anyway. I was the youngest crocheter, the youngest member of my group by probably 10 or 15 years. And I still really enjoy the company of other fiber people. It's just good to get together and work on projects and have help and just talk about yarn. So don't feel intimidated that you won't be welcome just because you're really young. I think you should go anyway. The reality is that they like having all sorts of people meet up and work on stuff. Some groups tend to only do charity knitting. So I know the one local library group is only for charity knitting. They get donations of yarn and they work on blankets to donate. And they don't typically bring their own projects with to work on. So there are some groups that do that, and it's a great way if you don't have a very large yarn budget. You can just go work on donated yarn with other people. If you just want to work towards charity projects and have some company. But if you want to work on your own projects, you might find a group that just gets together to meet. I think there are actually, in my area, there's a handful of groups that meet at Panera even. I don't know totally how you find out about those groups. We get a local email for all of Central Illinois that tells me where all of the groups are at, run by a woman who takes care of all that. But outside of Central Illinois, I can't really advise you where all of the groups meet up. But a yarn store would be a great place to find out. Even if they don't have a meetup, they might know of other ones in the area. All right. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap things up. As always, if you have questions, if you have projects that you've made from patterns that I've shared as videos and you want to share something with me, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram at Experiments in Crafting. I also have a Twitter account that you can search for Experiments in Crafting and find me there. Feel free to tag me in pictures if you're going to post them to your own Instagram, or send them as direct messages to me on Facebook or Instagram. I love to see projects that you've worked up. If you're having issues with any of my videos, but any patterns in general, I'm willing to help out with anything crochet related or yarn questions that you might have. Send those to me on Facebook, Instagram, direct message me, and I'd be happy to help you out there. And one last time, if you like this video and you'd like to see more content like this, please hit subscribe and like the video if you're enjoying the live stream. If you're watching this after the video's ended, please stick all of your questions down in the comment section and I'll be happy to help you out with anything that I can. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you guys next week. Bye.